July 30th, 1949. 2200 hours. The Yangtze River, deep inside communist-controlled China. HMS Amethyst, a Royal Navy frigate of 1,350 tons, slips her anchor in total darkness and begins moving downriver at full speed, running without lights past shore batteries that have already put 19 of her own crew in graves. She has been trapped here for 101 days, grounded on a mudbank, after a communist artillery ambush tore through her hull in April, blockaded ever since by gun positions lining both riverbanks for over 100 miles in every direction. 3 separate Royal Navy ships have already tried to reach her and failed, taking damage and casualties of their own before being driven back downstream. Ahead of her tonight lies over 100 miles of river she has to run entirely on her own, past every one of those same guns, using nothing but darkness, the tide, and the cover of a passing merchant steamer to hide her outline from gunners who have had 3 months to memorize exactly where a British warship would need to pass. Her captain has given the order in secret, hours before, telling almost no one until the moment the anchor chain actually starts to run. In the next 14 hours, Amethyst will either reach open water, or she will not leave this river at all. This is the story of the escape the entire world was listening for on the radio, and the 4 words that told them it had worked. The trouble began on April 20th, when Amethyst was ordered up the Yangtze toward Nanjing to relieve the guard ship stationed at the British Embassy, a routine rotation during the closing months of the Chinese Civil War. Without warning, Communist People's Liberation Army artillery batteries on the northern riverbank opened fire on her from close range, a bombardment so sudden and so accurate that within minutes her commanding officer, Lieutenant Commander Bernard Skinner, was mortally wounded and the ship's steering and engine spaces were flooding. 19 of her crew were killed outright and dozens more wounded before she managed to run herself aground on Rose Island to avoid sinking in open water. 3 Royal Navy ships, HMS Consort, HMS London, and HMS Black Swan, each attempted in turn over the following days to reach Amethyst and tow her clear, and each was driven back by the same shore batteries, taking further casualties of their own. By the end of April, London's naval command in the region concluded that any further rescue attempt by force would simply add more damaged ships and dead sailors to the total, and Amethyst was left where she sat, alone, aground, and effectively a prisoner of the riverbank guns surrounding her. What followed was 10 weeks that looked, from London and from Beijing alike, like a stalemate that could only end one of 2 ways. Communist authorities demanded that Amethyst's officers admit to firing first, a confession her acting commanding officer, Lieutenant Commander John Cairns, refused to give, since accepting blame would hand Communist China a propaganda victory over an incident the ship's own log showed had begun, with the shore batteries opening fire. Without provocation, Cairns, promoted into command after Skinner's death, spent the standoff quietly directing repairs to Amethyst's engines under the noses of the communist patrol boats, watching her, stockpiling fuel, siphoned and traded through what limited contact the crew could arrange, and studying the river itself, its currents, its sandbars, and the pattern of merchant traffic still permitted to pass, for any opening that might let the ship move without permission. Naval planners in London and Hong Kong considered further armed rescue attempts and discarded each one, since nothing short of another running gunfight through the same guns that had already crippled 3 ships seemed to offer any real chance of getting Amethyst out alive. Cairns's answer, when it came, depended on one specific piece of the river itself, rather than on force. Downriver traffic still occasionally included the Chinese merchant steamer Qiangling Liberation, moving past under a flag of truce that communist gunners were reluctant to fire on, If Amethyst could time her own escape to fall in directly behind that steamer's silhouette in the dark, using the larger ship's outline to blur her own on a moonless night, she might pass batteries that had spent 3 months waiting specifically for a British warship-shaped target to appear alone. The plan required exact tidal timing to carry the ship's draft over the shallows downriver, functioning engines that had been quietly repaired under blockade, and total secrecy, since any signal intercepted by communist listening posts monitoring the ship's radio traffic would give away the attempt before the anchor ever left the riverbed. If you're finding this dive into Royal Navy history interesting, subscribing helps the channel keep telling these stories. At 2200 on July 30th, Amethyst slipped her cable and began moving downriver, catching the Kyongling Liberation's silhouette ahead of her within the first stretch of the run and tucking in behind it as planned. Communist shore batteries opened fire within the first hour regardless, and Kieran's held course through the shelling, running blacked out at speeds his damaged engines were never rated to sustain for this long, threading a river he had only ever studied from a stationary position, now moving through it at night, under fire, with no room for a single navigational mistake. Somewhere in the darkness, the Kyongling Liberation struck a mine, or was hit, and fell away, and Amethyst continued alone for the remainder of the run, past mile after mile of the same gun positions that had crippled 3 rescue ships sent to reach her 3 months earlier. For the better part of 14 hours, nobody outside the ship knew whether she had made it through or been sunk somewhere in the dark stretches of river where no observer could confirm either outcome. At 0431 on July 31st, Amethyst's radio operator sent a signal that reached the Admiralty and was relayed to a British public that had followed the standoff in the newspapers for 3 months. Have rejoined the fleet south of Wusung. No damage or casualties. God save the king. She had run over 100 miles of river, most of it lined with the same artillery that had already killed 19 of her crew and driven off every ship sent to help her, and reached open water with her hull and her remaining crew intact. Crowds gathered at Plymouth when she finally arrived home in November 1949, and Kerens was promoted and later knighted for the escape, a career that eventually carried him into Parliament. The strategic and political fallout outlasted the escape itself by decades. The Yangtze incident is widely regarded as the last occasion on which the Royal Navy attempted to exercise the kind of unchallenged river passage rights it had held in China since the 19th century, and Communist China's ability to trap and eventually watch a British warship run their gauntlet became, in Chinese accounts of the period, a symbolic marker of the end of what is termed the century of foreign gunboat diplomacy on Chinese rivers. For Britain, the episode became instead a story of quiet, unarmed defiance. A crew that endured 3 months of blockade without surrendering their ship or their position, and a captain who got them out not by fighting his way through, but by outlasting and outweighting an enemy that had every gun trained on the river and still couldn't stop him leaving. Amethyst was never built to run a gauntlet of coastal artillery alone, at night, towing nothing behind her but the hope that a merchant ship's shadow would be enough to save her. She was a modest frigate on a routine embassy rotation, and for 101 days she sat aground as proof of exactly how little that routine assignment had prepared her for what came next. What got her out wasn't bigger guns or a rescue force finally strong enough to punch through. It was a captain who spent 10 weeks quietly repairing his engines under blockade, studying a river he wasn't supposed to be studying, and waiting for exactly one night when the tide, the dark, and a passing steamer's silhouette all lined up at once.